start out talking about inequality, right? What's the shape of inequality from, if you plot it on the curve from around the beginning of the 20th century to the end, what's it look like? It looks like that. Really, really high levels around 1929. Really, really, really high levels now. In fact, higher. There was a moment where I think where it's actually higher than 1929. What's important about that 1929 moment? What happens in 1929? The Great Depression. The Great Depression. What happens after you've got this dip that goes from what? The 30s or so till about from maybe the mid to late 70s. What is it that causes the level of inequality to actually decrease? Politics, right? Politics. What we've got is a number of activists, leftists, communists, anarchists, union workers who put so much pressure on the federal government that the federal government actually creates a new deal with its citizens, right? And there are 4 sets of broad policies or broad ideas that are embedded in that new deal. First is like old age insurance, what we now know as Social Security. The second are a series of protections that allow labor to organize. Third is unemployment insurance. And then the fourth is welfare. And then with the Great Society programs of the 60s, you've got medical insurance, and then you've got a range of civil rights protections. That's what ends up creating a condition where you've got really, really high, really, really low levels in that middle period. What happens to make inequality actually go up? What you've got is actually the appearance of 2 economic phenomena that are very, very rarely supposed to happen at the same time. One is high levels of inflation. 2 is high levels of unemployment. Now, why are they not usually supposed to happen at the same time? Because usually the price of goods raise when you got so many people with so much loot that they just throw in the loot at the goods and then the prices raise, right? But we actually don't see that in this moment. It actually generates an ideational crisis. It was a material crisis, but it was also an ideational crisis in that the economic ideas that people used to use to solve the economy revealed themselves to be broken. So this is a story I tell about this all the time. I had a friend in St. Louis one day. She actually called me. She was like, "Yo, I fell in the bathroom. I hit my head against the toilet, and I end up losing like 3-4 minutes." Right? I like passed out for 3-4 minutes. Should I go to the hospital? I was like, yeah. She was like, well, I don't know. I don't think I'm hurt. I said, well, the thing is you broke the thing you usually use to think whether you're right? So in this moment, it was like economic theory itself was broken. Right? So in that gap came a series of ideas that we associate with the neoliberal turn. A new set of economic arrangements between government, capital, and labor. So what does it do? What are the policies associated with the neoliberal turn? First is a significant reduction of labor's ability to organize. Second is a significant increase in capital's ability to move across borders within the United States, increasingly outside of the United States. Third, a significant reduction in the government's ability to actually collect taxes. And then fourth, a significant reduction in the change in the nature of what we think of as the welfare state. So what we look at is we've got significant increases in productivity, but wages flatline. Right, in part because unions no longer have the strength they do. Labor doesn't have the power it does, right? So here's one way to think about this, how this really, really works. I'm a professor, so 30 years ago, if somebody wanted to get in touch with their professor, what would they do? They'd either use a real phone or they would go to office hours, right? And what that would mean theoretically is that the professor would be available maybe till about 5:00 p.m., and then once the professor went home, when would the professor be available again? The next day. It doesn't really work like that no more. Right? There are some students in the audience. You email your professor at 7 p.m. When are you expecting that response? You tweet your professor when you expect him to tweet back. Right? Like immediately. Right? But we're getting paid what? About the same. Now you can repeat that for every field of endeavor where you're asked to do more and more and more, and we're paid less and less and less. Union membership, right? Now it's important. Look around the time that a union membership actually drops. It starts to drop around the time that inequality increases, right? Welfare benefits. Again, look, it takes on a negative slope around the time inequality increases. Incarceration rates. Yeah, it ain't no joke. And it's actually interesting because we're having this big conversation now about incarceration. Although we have had a significant uptick in federal prisoners, most of this is actually in state prisons, not in federal prisons, right? And again, the uptick actually happens when inequality increases. Now, how does this affect cities? Cities are actually constrained in a couple of different ways. As a result of the neoliberal turn, cities can no longer collect the revenue through taxes. They can no longer get the support from either state government or federal government that it once used to be able to. And they're incentivized to do more and more and more to attract downtown investment, right? So that's the Inner Harbor in where I live in Baltimore. In Detroit, my hometown, shout out to the 313. They're building a new Red Wings stadium for the Detroit Red Wings. I think Detroit taxpayers are paying the bulk of that bill. I think the bill is like $600 million. I think Detroit taxpayers are on the hook for $400 million of it, right? A few years ago, more than 10, 15 years ago, they built a new stadium for the Detroit Lions. They built a new stadium for the Detroit Tigers. In both cases, taxpayers end up footing the bill. So the city ends up becoming this huge engine, and you've got this large sucking sound where what revenue the city has is going to high-income earners and going to corporations, right? What this ends up doing is significantly increasing the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots are really, really, really suffering because that base isn't there anymore, right? That safety net that used to be there is no longer there. The federal government doesn't have the resources it once did, and then cities don't have the resources that it once did. And in fact, even now, a set of ideas embedded in society where we don't even think we're supposed to, right? We think somebody like this, they actually deserve their fate, right? But the other thing that happens is you see cities increasingly use police for two purposes. One purpose is revenue generation. The second purpose is social control. Revenue generation, I'm going to talk more about Baltimore in a second, but I'm going to touch quickly on Ferguson. Revenue generation, as a result of what happened to Michael Brown, we all eyes turned towards Ferguson. Ferguson gets 21% of its municipal revenue from policing. Third highest source of revenue generation. City after city, or small city after small city after small city are using police to get revenue. The other thing is, as an agent of social control, how does this play out in Baltimore? 1990 or so, police, the city of Baltimore spends approximately $145 million on police. As of last year, or maybe even this year, $475 million on police. $37 million around 1990 on parks and recs, $37 million now. Spending on police has increased 300%. If we looked at a nation, let's say the United States, 1 out of every 4 federal government employees was an agent in the military, we would think we lived in a police state. What's happening in cities like Baltimore is increasingly they're basically police cities. I actually study black politics. One of the questions is what difference does having a black mayor? As you can see, there actually isn't that big a difference whether it's O'Malley or it's Schmoke or Dixon or Rawlings Blake, who you see a significant increase, right, under all types of mayoral regimes. Now, what causes this? Now, the thing is, it's possible that the rise in police spending could be a function of population increase. Well, population is going in the wrong direction, right? We see a population decrease along with the significant rise, right? It could be that it's a partial function of violent crime. But it actually, violent crime, now it could be, because violent crime is going down as police spending is going up. But it seems to me that the rate of increase in police spending is actually far greater than the rate of decrease in violent crime. It actually looks like there's something else going on. Now, why do I talk about this and end with a video camera? One of the things that's really interesting about TED, as far as TED's political line, right, is that the political line of TED in general is that if you bring technology and design together, we can make the world a better place. And we see this conversation happening with policing, right? Like if we give police cameras, then they will actually act better. And there's actually something to this. There's actually something to this. Research, I think, clearly shows that video cameras actually make police act right. But what I'd actually argue is that we don't have a technical design problem. We actually have a political design problem. As a result of transformations in political institutions that start in the 70s, police actually fulfill a very different function. And until we actually engage in political battle about the function of the police, about what we can do to place the police under democratic control, we're going to have far more Michael Browns, far more Eric Garners, far more Freddie Grays. And on that note, I'm out.